get into the environmental a little bit when you start talking manure storages and bunker silos. And that's not just dairy, I do some livestock stuff as well. So anyway, when we're talking hoof health and we're talking facilities, what's one of the first things you start thinking about facilities wise? Anybody?
My biggest pet peeve is always moisture.
Okay,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, if it's a wet barn.
Because they're walking through a parlor, they're walking through a foot bath, they're walking through manure, and all that kind of stuff. And probably one of the biggest things we think about, of course, is a foot bath. When you're talking, especially you're talking moisture, but we want to get those dunks,
Yeah.
right? We want to make sure we get enough exposure to that treatment. So the preferred dimensions are 10 to 12 feet long, or about 3 to 3.5 meters long, and that gets you 3 to 4 dunks per hoof. What are you usually seeing for foot bath length? 6, 7 maybe? And I can't find any research anywhere as to where that number came from. I think it's just something, somebody at one time
Well, they,
molded a foot bath, and the industry said that looks good enough.
I think they just measured the 4 feet of the cow when she was standing still.
So- Right.
If she's standing in it, then all 4 feet are in it.
Yeah.
That's all they went by.
But, you know, that's twice as long as what we usually see. And there's a lot of research that backs that up, because again, we want that 3 to 4 dunks per hoof. And we like to see the base of it about 20 to 24 inches wide, and then flares up to about 36 inches. That way we can move those cattle through there one at a time. And we find that if they're going through single file, they tend to go through a little bit quicker, a little bit more uniformly, instead of bunching up, instead of trying to hop across. It's just one at a time seems to work better. With a 6 to 8 inch curb and then a 4 inch solution depth, that gets us up above the ring of the hoof, the top of the hoof. So we know we get good exposure. And obviously should be level, because if it's on a slope, like in a return alley, we've got one section that's, you know, full depth, and then the other we've got barely enough to say so. So how are we getting the exposure on that hoof? And we want to be able to exclude it when not in use. And, you know, no sense having animals run through there if we don't need to. And then a side opening gate for downed animals, or if it gets cleaning. You know, if somebody goes down in there, boy, it's nice to be able to just open that gate up and let her get her footing outside of that stall. 'Cause if it's only 36 inches wide or 24 now where she's laying, she's not gonna be able to get back up. Now, again, accessible drain plug so we can maintain it. Frostless hydrant to refill. And then quite often we've seen an elevated premix for fast, clean, and recharge. So you're not trying to fill up this huge foot bath and get it mixed. We have a premix that's probably gonna fill it halfway really quickly, and then we just dilute it a little bit more. So some of the dimensions, and this is from Wisconsin, but you can see we're about 24 inches wide. This would be about 36 inches wide up here. It's about 3 feet wide here, and again, 10 to 12 feet long. They have drawn in here where they can flip this over, and that just kind of covers up the foot bath when it's not in use. And again, the side opening so that we can get the animal out if she goes down. Also makes it a lot easier to clean. So you're not in there trying to clean a little 2-foot space, but if the gates are open, well, you can stand on the outside and really clean, get a good purchase on it. Again, just a little better look at it. Here's one that it's obviously more than 2 feet wide. It is about 13 feet long. But when you're releasing 24 cows on the side at one time to try and get them through back in the return alley, one at a time is a little much to ask. So this is a much wider footpath. but that's because the animals are coming back as a fairly good-sized group. And again, this is what an elevated recharge system might look like. Granted, this one's in Texas, so they don't necessarily have to worry about the freezing that we have up here. I suppose if you know, you really wanted to do this, maybe you could build a little shed up there or something that's gonna stay heated, or, you know, doesn't have to be warm, it just has to not freeze. This is what I would call kind of a swing and a miss. We've got it makes sense to a certain point, because here we've got these two robots facing each other. Cow comes out of the robot, she has to step in that foot bath in order to get out. The only thing is, she's having to step down into it because the bottom of this foot bath is actually below this stall surface here. And you can already see the platform in the robot is up 6 inches. So she's stepping down 6 to 12 inches just to get in there. And then the only other thing is, there's only about 6 feet between these two railings here. So she has to step down and turn at the same time. So she's moving in 2 axes at the same time, and now she's also spinning, which does wonders for the hoof, right? When you start spinning on an animal on concrete. So that's why I say it's a swing and a miss. It's kind of like a good idea, but it doesn't quite make the cut. So flooring, of course, that's the other big thing. We like to see these, you know, nice, clean, level surfaces, nice defined grooves that can be molded in when the concrete is laid, if it's done right, or they can come back later when the concrete is set up to a certain point and cut them in. Again, that it's nice and level all the way across, nice and uniform. And you can see this was formed obviously when the concrete was fresh, but they waited long. They did a good job floating the surface in the beginning, and then waited just the right amount of time that when they ran that float through there, it maintained the finish on the float. The only other thing I might say is maybe these edges are not quite as square as we'd like to see them. They're a little bit more rounded. Again, you know, there are places where we need to do a little extra grooving, a little cross hatching. This is a farm in Pennsylvania. As you can see, there's a little bit of a slope here because here's the gate up here, and you can see that we've got probably a foot, maybe 15 inches on this side of the gate, and we've got 18 to 22, 24 inches on that side. So there's about an 8% slope here, or 1 in 12. One thing that they eventually had to do was actually enclose this because they were going through salt and barn lime for 3 months, like crazy, just because, yeah, it was exposed, and the cows would pack it down and it would just become ice. So what are the good characteristics of groove floors? Well, one, we'd like to see a nice flat surface between the grooves. What we don't want to see is something that looks like a Quonset hut on there, because now that hoof is riding on a very small surface area, and if it's wet and slippery, it's going to be sliding into the groove, so their footing is not going to be as sure as we'd like it to be. And a smooth surface between the edges, and this is, you know, this is what you were talking about this, you know, the aggregate sticking up out of this, and this looks like all they did is they just kind of poured it into place, maybe gave it a rough screed, walked away, and then came back later and tried to cut the grooves in it. But as you can imagine, there's all these little bits and pieces of aggregate sticking up there, creating little pinch points. And then, of course, smooth edges. These are nice and smooth, well defined, and this is what I'm talking about. They probably came back here and either troweled it too early, and it was still really soft, or you always got one guy on the crew who thinks he's Aquaman sits there with the hose and adds a lot of extra water to the final surface. Because you can see in between here, that looks pretty rough. And we've got all of these little ridges, we call them flash. About the only cure for this is to grind it off or go run a mafia block up and down the barn for a while before you put the animals in there. And then of course proper spacing. We like to see these, you know, somewhere around 3 inches, anywhere from 2 3/4 to 3 1/4 inches on center. That's big enough that a cow has a good place to put her foot, but we still have enough exposure to the grooves, because when it crosses a groove, that's when we have the traction. And these are probably about 2 inches on center. Nice flat surface, well-defined edges. This would probably work better in a calf barn or a young heifer. And this of course would be in a mature cow barn. And here's something that I think works well, but there's been some reports that it might be a little too abrasive. It's called micro grooving, and what they do is they'll cut these grooves. They're about a 1/2 inch on center, but they're only a 1/4 inch wide and a 1/4 inch deep. And they'll groove everything except the 6 inches next to the curb, and the 6 inches next to the feed bunk, and then 6 inches down the middle where maybe the cable or chain will ride on an automatic alley scraper. But it gives you a lot of grooves for that hoof to cross to get good traction. And these run essentially parallel to the stall beds. As long as the manure is fairly liquid, they stay clean. If you get into like a dry cow or spring and heifer situation where the manure is a lot drier, these can tend to fill up, and then now you're back to a, you know, yep. This is what again, another swing and a miss. This was formed with a roller, a very heavy roller, and it has this pattern on that roller. And they did a good job floating because we've got a nice uniform surface, and they did it at the right time because we've got some well-defined grooves in there. The only thing is these grooves are about 6 inches apart here, and they're about 2 1/2 up here. And you can see that there's a whole hoof print right there, and there's another one down here. That animal never crossed a groove to get any traction. So it looks good, but functionally it's questionable. And then here's one that seems to be a favorite. This is actually stamped concrete. So they'll float the concrete and they'll get it to where it's really starting to be like firm jello. And then they'll throw some releasing powder on it. And then they have these big heavy rubber mats. They're about 4 by 4. And they lay them down, and then they either hit them with a hand tamper or they'll run around them on a plate tamper to form this pattern. This works great for driveways, sidewalks, patios. But when it comes to cattle lanes, basically they've got 6 by 6, 6 by 9, and some 6 by 12 randomly in there. So already, you know, the spacing between grooves is nowhere near where we'd like it to be. The other thing is, these surfaces are like cobblestone. They're a little bit convex. So again, you got these animals standing on very little contact surface. So looks good. Like I say, works great in a driveway or sidewalk or patio, but not in a freestall. When we talked about the moisture and getting rid of it is hand. You've probably seen some of these kind of it's Keystone Concrete down in Pennsylvania, and I'm not sure they sell these anymore because I couldn't find it on their website anymore. But it runs down the middle of the alley, and the idea is that when you pour the alley a little bit of a slope up away from it. So the free moisture in the alley finds its way down in here, and then there's a paddle that sits in there, and it's hooked to the alley scraper. And when the alley scraper backs up, of course, that lifts up, and then when the alley scraper goes forward, then it drops down and goes out. The only thing we found issue on this might be the fact that if you don't have enough animals in the barn to keep the barn warm enough, it will freeze. You get that week of like single digits, that will freeze, and guys have learned that, okay, if it's going down, temperature's going down, I'm gonna unhook that paddle so I don't tear it out in there. Nice alternatives, rubber flooring. Of course, you see a lot on walkways, see it in front, any place where animals are gonna be standing still for a while, or a high traffic area. So, concrete versus rubber. Well, of course, the big thing is the coefficient of friction. It's a unitless number. We engineers come up with all these numbers, all unitless, but they help us figure out what's going on. And range from 0 to 0, that's slippery, that'd be like ice, and to 1, it's sticky. Although I have seen some where they come up with like 1.4, and it turns out it's hot rubber on hot pavement. So I don't know if they're taking that at a drag strip or where, but what we're looking for when we have, well, rubber, we can expect this unit, this number to be between 0.45 and 0.6, whereas concrete's 0.35 to 0.40. So that means concrete is more or less slippery than rubber. More slippery. So why is that important? Well, the critical coefficient of friction, or what we call the static friction, which is what prevents the slipping from starting from a standing, moving from a stopped area. So what we need for that is between 0.4 and 0.7. Well, rubber seems to be right in that sweet spot, doesn't it? Whereas concrete is below it. So concrete is slipperier than what the animal needs to get started moving. So that's one of the pluses to rubber. Compressibility is a factor. In other words, if it gives a little bit, that hoof can settle into that a little bit more. And we see that better with newer rubber rather than something that's recycled. And again, rubber allows for a faster pace or longer stride of the animal, less slip. When we talk about herdsmen and guys pushing the cows, they tend to walk like this, right? Whereas the cow is kind of... So if we can get her to at least take a little longer stride because she feels a little more sure-footed, we can get her to and from the parlor a little faster. Now, does it reduce lameness? Well, we've seen some mixed results. Some studies have said yes, some studies said there's no difference, and some studies have said, nah, it might actually even be on the bottom, on the end, low side. But I don't know all the ins and outs of all those studies, I just know what the results were. So the best management practices for rubber flooring, of course, around parlors, any place a cow is going to twist or turn sharply. So that's going to be your platform in the parallels where they come in and they have to suddenly make a right-hand turn. Right at the end, we've got exit at the rotary where she has to back out and then make a turn. And of course, on the herringbones, there's always that one side the animal has to come out, make a 90, take 2 steps, make another 90, back to the return lane. So if we can put some rubber in there to give her a little bit of give. So yeah, just like that, she has to come in, make an immediate 90, make that turn. Now it's not a problem going out because she's generally going to raise up the gate and just make a straight shot out. So we like highly compressible rubber in the holding areas and returns, because if she can bury her foot into that a little bit, she's going to have a little more grip. And these areas, the holding areas and returns, tend to be sloped, right? You've got the animals coming up and you got the animals going back. So if we can allow her hoof to move in and settle in a little bit, she gets a little better footing. Recycled rubber on lanes and flat areas. again, that's gonna help reduce the hoof wear and the concussive forces that she's gonna experience. Remember, you're putting 1,500 pounds of pressure on something that big, so that's gonna make a big difference. Of course, along feed bunks, generally with only deep bedded stalls, and I would argue maybe not so much deep bedded stalls, but well bedded stalls, comfortable stalls. Because if the alley is easier to lie on than getting in and out of a stall, where's she gonna lie? In the alley, right? Then what happens? Once an alley layer, always an alley layer, right? So, in order for this to work well, we need to have those stalls taken care of. Place along the feed bunks, especially in the heifer barn, this to minimize the corkscrew claw syndrome and thin soles. And over slatted floors. Again, it just gives them a little bit more grip in there. So, stalls, I'm often asked, well, what's the best free stall? Well, no free stall at all, really, compost bedded pack. I've seen an awful lot of granny cows that, you know, basically have 3 hooves already, 3 feet on the truck already, make a big comeback. It also makes it a lot easier to detect heat, because when they do come in heat, everybody's in heat. But if we don't have that option, you know, what's the ideal free stall? Well, generally deep bedded sand. We've got a brisket locator in there. We've got some dense grade aggregate underneath, so we've got good support, good drainage, about an 8 to 10 inch curve on the back side, a little bit of a slope in. We've got a loop here that has at least a 32 to 36 inch space in between. That way, if she needs to stand up or lie down or move sideways because she's got somebody on the other side of her or a wall, she can at least turn sideways fairly easily. And then of course this neck rail being high enough that she can get in and out. One thing we don't want to see, and thank goodness a lot of these are going out, are these old, this is not the same as a brisket locator. So we used to lay up a 2x8 or 2x10 and then pour concrete in between. What does that do to a cow's shoulder? It's not good for it, is it? No. The other thing is, this sits proud of the surface, whereas that brisket locator, that's this thing right here. Yeah, it's concrete, but it's at the same level as the top of the bedding. And what that does is, one, it helps locate her in the stall, but also when she goes to stand up, now she's got something solid to really plant that front hoof so she can hike her butt end up. And it also holds the post in place. So, you see this, best thing to do with this is just remove it. And this is where Carrie, oh, she's out of here. I'm gonna say she shaved about 5 to 7 minutes off my presentation because now I don't have to set these up. But here what they're doing is comparing a sand stall with a mattress stall. So this mattress is, I think it says a crumb rubber mattress with a geotextile cover. So they're looking, and this is lying time versus, you know, the proportion of those lying bouts. And you can see with the mat, most of their lying bouts are short term. So anywhere, you know, from 15 minutes to maybe 2 hours. Whereas those that are in sand, it's more evenly distributed. So they're spending more time lying down in a sand stall than they are in a mattress stall. So what's that tell you about those two when you make that comparison? Sand's more comfortable. It's just like you. You've been sitting in that chair a while, right? It's a pretty decent chair. Now if I get you one of those metal ones, or even some of those folding wooden ones, how long is anybody going to be sitting in those? Same thing. Not to say that it's a bad thing, but it's just, if we have the ability to use sand, deep bedded sand, maybe I ought to consider that. And there's a farm I was called into because they were using 85 to 90 pounds of sand per stall per day. And their storage was filling up faster than it was supposed to. It was supposed to be a 6-month storage. It was 3 months and they were almost full. So what are we looking at here?
I thought they got way too much in the front was.
Kind of brings new meaning to the term deep bedded sand, doesn't it? What else are we seeing in here? Maybe something that kind of points to that.
Lots it out in the stall.
Well, there's a lot of it out there, but how about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 8 or 9 is standing up, they're perching in the stalls, right? And again, that's, you know, that's a cow telling me that, boy, I'd really like to lie down, I think I can lie down, but if I get into this stall, I don't know if I can lie down, and even if I do lie down, can I get back up, because there's not a whole lot of space between the top of that bed and this neck rail. So, finally had the guy, all right, we need to take a little sand out. Just a little. So they did take it out, and sure enough, the cows started using it. And this is a robot herd, and they found out that actually visits to the robot started to level out a little better. They weren't having as many fetch cows because the cows had enough time to actually lie down. Again, it's almost like overcrowding, because these stalls, you can see the only way they fit in there is they learn to hog it out. So they would sit there
Make
after.
themselves a bed.
Yep, and you know, you can see how much sand is along the curb just then, and he had scraped not too long ago. So they finally figured it out. Last I checked, they were about 55, 60 pounds per stall per day instead of the 85, 90.
That wasn't winter either, was it? So it wasn't frozen in there like that? Sure.
No, it was a good, very comfortable sand that moved around,
Yeah.
which was nice, but it's just, there was just way too much in there, you know? How do you fit a cow in a space this big? That was a lot of it. There was no way for them to lie down. So, sand stalls, but many times we can't incorporate sand because of the systems they have. They have a manure system that
That's us. No way.
there's just no way. You know, so you're having to stick with that organic bedding. Well, and if we have the rubber mattress, okay, what can we do? Well, it may mean jackhammering out some of this if it's concreted. And if you're putting in new stalls, I would stay away from as much concrete as you can. Not just from expense, but from ability to do different things. Still, you're gonna have a nice dense graded aggregate packed right in there. Get yourself a well-drained, firm surface. We can come in with that rubber mattress and cover again, just mounting it a little lower, a little deeper. We're gonna excavate some of that out. We're gonna mount it on the brisket locator and on the back of the stall. Then come back with your organic bedding and keep at least 2 inches on top of it. And they have found, when they looked at, okay, they're looking at, I have to set this up a little bit. They looked first at, when they did this study, they looked at, okay, if we've got a sand stall and we've got a mattress type stall, how are the animals using it versus what their locomotion score is? So 1 being a nice healthy animal, 3 being, you know, head bobbing and lifting the hoof and whatnot. And we know we want a lot of lying time, and that's what these dark portions of the bar are. We can see that no matter what the lameness score was, the stall usage was almost all the same. Whereas with the mattress, as the locomotion score got higher, in other words, the more lame they were, the less they used the stall. In fact, they spent most of their time standing up in the stall, because it's very hard for them to get in and out. So then they're looking, okay, what can we do? And what they're looking at is, all right, what's the alternative? So they compared the mattress stall again with what they called the pack mat, which is what I just showed you. It was recessing that mattress and then covering it with 2 to 4 inches of bedding over top. And again, we're seeing that they are using that, no matter what the locomotion score was, they're using that pack mat much better than they would the mattress. In fact, they're looking at, and I don't know if you can see these numbers, this is the hours of usage, 13.1, 13.1, 13.1 versus 12, 10, and 8, almost 9. So if we're looking for that 12 to 14 hour lay time, and you can't do full sand, that might be an option for you. And then we've seen this, again, we've got something in front of them. It does help them locate. Some research is showing as long as that's less than 4 inches, it's not a problem. But this also is it's a plastic, high density polyethylene, but it does give a little. So it's not like the boards and concrete. And no, she's not dead, she's just really chill. One thing I might say for, cow comfort here, maybe a couple links of chain would help there. They have water beds with a canvas top on it, and obviously it's very comfortable. She's maxing it, relaxing, right? The only thing is, when there's not enough bedding, we tend to see these, bare spots, these hawk lesions. So that would be one that, boy, they could probably use a little more bedding on there. So, any question? No, we went through that kind of quick. Any questions, comments? You were out of the room when I meant to say thank you for shaving off about 5 to 7 minutes of my presentation, because you had a lot of the same stuff, and I didn't have to set up the data. I just had to show it.
No questions?
No questions. Either I totally lost them or I
You're just
answered
perfect,
everything.
yeah.
No, I guess that's.
Alright. Well, in that case, thank you, Tim.
Tim, I have one question. I hate to see you leave without a question.
Yay.
Not to put you on the spot. What's the amount of recycled manure solids we should be putting in a stall? In terms of pounds. I heard you reference the number of sand, but I don't know reference it.
I don't have a number on that. I don't know if we've even looked at what that is. I think we're just trying to get it through there enough so, because it's, obviously the perfect medium for petri dish in the barn. And we're just trying to get it through there. I
So
haven't
nothing in
heard-
deep beds, I'm thinking with shit like on a mattress, if you're bending a mattress with on a mess, with recycled manure solids. 50 pounds would be a lot, right?
Yeah, I mean, because your density is different than sand.
Yeah.
The other thing we've seen too is that we really don't want to use recycled sand with the heifers, because it seems to be a little bit more abrasive. I'm kind of getting away from your question, I'm sorry. And the reason for that is, once it's been through the system, a lot of your fines are taken out of it. So you've got that heavier, sharper material on there. So if sand is heavier, back to recycled solids, I'm sorry, I don't have a number for you. I think a lot of it's just, we need to keep it moving through, and if we put it up front and then just allow it to migrate back, it'll dry and then get pulled out. But even with sand, we've got that same thing where that back end of that stall gets pretty rank, and that you have to dig it down to the bottom of the curb.
Let's go with 50 pounds until somebody tells us we're wrong.
That's a lot of,
It's so fluffy.
I think, probably that,
Yeah,
You're
it's
gonna
not
have
when
to
you put it in, Gerard, right? I mean, it's usually like 30% dry matter.
it's usually, yeah.
Or 30% moisture, 70% dry matter. No, other way
No,
around.
it's the other way around, because
The other way around.
it's pretty much the same as silage.
Yeah, it's wet.
It's wet. And that depends too on what their process is. Is it being separated and then here's a pile, and boy, today we're gonna come in and take that pile out, or it's a pile here and then that gets flipped, and then that gets flipped, and then finally we're drawing out from something there, that obviously there's gonna be some moisture loss there. I think you almost have to say, okay, what are the KPIs of that sort of thing? Alright, are the, the sides of the cow, sides and udders of the cows still clean? Are we seeing, environmental mastitis? And if we're seeing those, then okay, maybe we need to ramp it up. No, we're not seeing it, it's just fine, we're doing okay, cause one other thing I've heard with those is the alleys tend to be a little slipperier. With the sand, you've got a lot of nice traction. With the separated solids, it tends to polish the concrete more or provides basically a sliding surface. So what that number is, I don't know. 50 pounds is still seems quite a bit. Did that answer your question, I hope?
We're good.
It's one of those things that, okay, what's the answer? Well, it depends. All right?
Alrighty. Well, thank you, Tim. And I just want to thank everyone here for coming out today. Thank you to Dr. Gerard Kramer, Tim Terry, and Carrie L for talking with us today. We're just very glad to kind of keep these conversations going, and feel free, we still have some desserts out, so feel free to eat some desserts. If you want to take some cake home with you, by all means. And otherwise, we are all wrapped up here, so thank you guys for coming.